I'd been very lucky growing up. I'd had a lot of opportunity. I went to private prep school, went to grammar school, went to Oxford. I've always been driven centrally by how can I make sure that the opportunities and benefits I've had, I can use that to benefit others. And as a founder, the other stage is sort of like you just have the purest form of there's a problem I want to solve, let's go and solve it. Our mission is to get 10 million more people into green jobs in 10 years. If there is no organisation which comes at this with the audacity to be like, you know what, there's this huge problem, we're going to take it on, then it's not going to work.
Welcome to the Bay HQ podcast, where we inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians. Today we have with us Richard Ng, who's the co-founder and CTO of greenworkx. He's also an Ada Ventures angel. How are you doing today?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me on.
So you've got a really interesting story because it's quite unusual.
Yeah.
So people get different backgrounds. They go into the corporate world or do something like that before becoming a founder. But you were in teaching first.
That's right.
And what I want to understand is, if you rewind further, when you're growing up, did you ever think you'd be in the startup world?
Not at all. It has been so many unexpected turns. Like there's been at least probably 3 different unexpected turns. So when I went into teaching, I genuinely thought this is what I'm going to be spending probably the rest of my life doing, or at least a very significant part of it, being in the kind of classic education system, because I knew I'd been very lucky growing up. I'd had a lot of opportunity. I went to private prep school, went to grammar school, went to Oxford. And so for me, I've always been driven centrally by how can I make sure that the opportunities and benefits I've had, I can in some way kind of use that to benefit others. And so I thought it's going to be teaching. Startups isn't what you normally would think of in that world. And so it never occurred to me, but I kind of just fell into it.
And even when you were a kid, did you have the idea that I've been very lucky? And when did the idea about teaching come into play? Was it always from a young age, or was it once you went to university?
When I was growing up, I knew I was fortunate. I knew that I was benefiting a lot from the educational opportunity I had. It didn't really crystallize into the idea of being a teacher until I had a sort of literally those scenes in movies where someone says one thing and it changes everything. It was genuinely like that, where I went to university and there was a very classic, you can be an accountant, you can be a consultant, you can be a banker, you can be a lawyer, and that's basically it. That's all the things you can do. And so I got sucked into that mill, and I was applying for an internship with some consultancy firm. And the interviewer called me up after to give me some feedback. And she said to me something like, what was really interesting was you sounded so much more passionate when talking about education than when talking about consulting, because I'd been telling her about some volunteering I was doing in a local school. And I reflected on that and I thought, yeah, I do care way more about education than I care about this consulting stuff. So I should do education. And genuinely that moment changed it for me. And then I was like, yeah, I'm going to do education, then did teach first and have been in education in various ways since.
So straight after university, right, you were teaching as part of the Teach First program.
Yes.
What made you decide to actually leave that traditional education system and go separate into the more technical and startup style of education?
So I'm a very, very idealistic person. And I've gotten better at managing that idealism. But basically, when I went into teaching, the sort of idea I had in my head was, I really see that opportunity is not fairly shared in this country. And what I want to do is really kind of go in and kind of make that system better. The thing which I'd underestimated was that schools have systems and bureaucracies, and they are there with good intent. There are lots of very well-meaning people in the education system. There's also a lot of people who are very cynical in the education system. It was not what I expected, and it didn't really kind of work well for me. And I think, to be honest, if you were to ask my colleagues from the time, a lot of them would probably say that Richard was this sort of maverick figure, wanted to do things his own way, which I think it's that sort of part of me, which has always been a streak, which has always been maybe there's a different way we can do things. I kind of fell into startups after that, which wasn't in retrospect, it sits really well in terms of if you come to something, you're maybe things can be different. Maybe we can just totally tear something up and start again and reimagine it. That actually fits super well in startups, but it wasn't a conscious sort of I'm going to startups. It literally was, when I left teaching, I was like, what do I do now? I'd thought I was going to be a teacher for a really long time. I was wrong. I've got no idea what I want to do. And there was this really random startup, which was a maths EdTech startup. And I thought, oh, well, I've been a maths teacher. like, I guess this is relevant. And I joined that, and then I just discovered like both the world of startups and the world of tech were just amazing, and it really appealed to me as a sense of like, well, firstly the tech side in terms of the scale of impact you can have, which you, as a teacher, you've got your classroom and maybe at best the school. And with tech, the number of people who you can impact and extend opportunity is so much greater. And then on the startup side, this idea of sense of possibility of maybe things can just be like 10 times better. And if we have an idea, let's just try it, you know, let's just get it out there and see what happens. And all that, I think, was where I was like, you know what, I've kind of found my home.
And it's interesting as well, because we often see in the news, right? Teachers are overworked. I think you said so many of them do come with this idealism that you had, right? They want to make a difference. They want to make the change. But it's just very difficult to do that within that bureaucratic system. And what a lot of EdTechs are doing, they provide that supplementary education, right? So it's not necessarily replacing school, but they can work together quite well and it can give those extra skills. And what did you find? So as you went into the first startup and you were just more helping out, what made you then decide, actually, let's go a bit further than this? And you worked at several different EdTechs, right? What did you learn during that process?
I worked at 3 different EdTech startups, each with different approaches. One of the things that I learned was how powerful it is when you have a really clear mission and what that can do in terms of like attracting brilliant people to join on something and work on that thing with you. And I also learned a lot about from working with these different founders, things where I'm like, wow, this is an amazing thing this founder has done, which I can really seek to emulate. And also, oh, wow, like, you know, this thing which actually has not gone that well, now I know not to make that mistake. And so there was it was a great sort of environment for me to, I think, really build my kind of beliefs about, okay, you know, what are the ways that I think like I want to approach a startup? And you know, it wasn't that I actually had set out to be a founder. I know I like early stage in particular. And I think you can scratch a lot of that itch by being an early hire, actually. You don't have to be a founder by any means. And you really care about something, which was, I think, true for me when I was in teaching. It's true for me in these startups. You are naturally just constantly thinking about like all the ways in which like, how could this be different even within a certain startup? And actually, you know, when you're a founder, actually you've got that ultimate empowerment of like, if there is something which should be different, well, the buck stops here. And there's responsibility, but also going with it, that sense of like, well, actually, you know what? I can just try and get this sorted out. It's the ultimate position of, I guess it's the logical extension of just removing kind of layers, removing bureaucracy. Because even in a startup, especially as they get bigger, there's always going to be elements of bureaucracy. Whereas as a founder, you know, especially early stage, it's sort of like you just have the purest form of, there's a problem I want to solve, let's go and solve it.
So it's interesting. I agree with you there as well. But what I'm finding is a tough thing about being a founder is just, especially in the idealism, right? There's just so many things you can do. And it's deciding what to do, right? And how do you prioritize? Because it's the whole visionary and integrator thing, right? Like people who've got this really big idea and want to make a huge change, there's so much more that you could potentially be doing. And it's even with what we're doing today, right? This is going to keep expanding. But it's how do you actually make the change? Because if you're so busy coming up with the strategies of the other things you can do and actually acting upon that. So with like your EdTech, right? What made you pick that particular problem to solve?
So it's really interesting because it, again, was one of these changes which I totally was not expecting. So as a bit of context, greenworkx is climate EdTech as opposed to the more sort of general EdTech, which I'd maybe been looking at before or in different domains. And we're focused on building the trade workforce to deliver net zero homes and roads. So we're looking at the problem of, well, actually, in order to reach net zero, we have all this incredibly important green infrastructure we need to deploy, solar panels, heat pumps, and you need a massive trade workforce to deliver that. So how on earth are you going to get people into those roles? So that's essentially the core problem we're tackling. And I don't come from a climate background. And I previously, to be honest, when it comes to climate, I'd always known it's important, clearly. But always, to be honest, being like, well, this is really important, but like, what have I got to offer? Like, wow, I really hope someone else figures this out. Like, it's probably not going to be me, but like, really hope someone does. Then I was speaking to Matt, who's now my co-founder, and he was explaining to me this problem of, well, we need to grow that trade workforce in order of magnitude. If anything, the workforce at the moment is older, dropping out the labour market, huge skills crunch. And I just thought to myself, well, there's such a clear, obvious moral imperative to this problem. It's a very different world where I've been much more recently focused on tech skills, on training people as software engineers. From going to that kind of like tech kind of software kind of focused skill world to the sort of actually, the boots on ground kind of trade roles, very, very different. But I thought, you know what, there's like constantly all the time people are saying we need more people to code, we need more people to work with data. And so this problem here is actually really well catered to. There's lots of great people and businesses who are tackling that problem. But this problem is just so underserved and it needs to be fixed. And I frankly thought to myself, well, in 10 years' time, if things on climate for the world really, really go downhill and I had not tried this, would I be able to live with my conscience? And I thought the answer was no. I thought I will really regret not having tried this because I don't want to be in that situation where I always have this sort of like, what if I had tried to do this? Would this have made some sort of difference to this overall huge problem, which is like one of the biggest challenges facing the world, clearly. So that's what basically for me was a simple, you know what? This is a problem I care about. No one else is doing it. Someone has to do it. I'm going to see if I can do it.
And you've got a huge target, right, as well, that you want to achieve. Can you tell the audience what that target is?
Our mission is to get 10 million more people into green jobs in 10 years. And that figure comes from the fact that by 2030, globally, between 30 to 60 million more people are needed for green jobs, depending on which report you look at. And so it's a huge mission. It's really audacious, really ambitious, but it needs to be, because if there is no organization which comes at this with the audacity to be like, you know what, there's this huge problem, we're going to take it on, then it's not going to work. And this goes back to what I was talking about before in terms of things that motivates me. What's really important to me is if you look at a problem, it's very easy for people to be like, oh, this is really hard, we can't do that. And what's really important for the world is you have people who go, wow, there's a thing here which we need to try and do. How can we best try and do it? And it's much more about like, well, what can we do rather than like, oh, it's not going to work for X, Y, Z reason. And so it's a sort of a huge mission, but I wake up every day knowing that it needs to happen. And, if it doesn't happen, like the world has much bigger problems than the fate of greenworkx.
Yeah. And like when you've got that huge mission on top of your shoulders, right? How do you actually go about starting a company like that, right? Because it's, as you know, like there's so many different factors going to the beginning stages, right? So you got your co-founder. Then from there, what are the first steps you took? How did you actually get started on that mission?
So the first thing for us was having sort of aligned together on this this is a thing which we want to really commit the next 10 plus years of our career to. From there, it's a sort of like you're saying, it's a sort of like, well, this is so big, like where do we start? Mm-hmm. And we were really helped by the fact that there were some very useful forcing mechanisms, such as from July, when we started talking about it, in August, Innovate UK, which is the government's social innovation agency, they release various funding competitions. They happened to release one in August, which was really well suited to us. And so it was like, right, well, this is our first thing we're going to do. We're going to do whatever we need to win this grant. And so we applied for that, and in September, we found out we had been successful. And I think outside that as well, outside that forcing mechanism, it's almost like each day, just try to make it a little bit more real. And what can you do to make it a little bit more real? Is it, you speak to another possible learner, you speak to another possible customer, you prototype something, and you can just, every day you make it a little bit more real, over time, obviously it accumulates, and before you know it, you have something and you step back and you think, wow, 8 months ago or whatever, we had nothing. But now we have, 30 learners who we've put through a sort of short course. We have our first kind of paying kind of client. We've got lots of other very exciting conversations going on, and, we've closed our pre-seed round of funding, and it's it's a bit like, so when I was a teacher, I was a maths teacher. And one of the things which I think people with a maths background love to talk about is that sort of compounding effect, like people, about saying that, like, one of the most powerful things in the world is, compound interest and things like that. And if there's a sense of like, if each day you just, make things a little bit better, it compounds so powerfully.
And so you mentioned there about the PhD leader as well. But if you go back to even the first bit of funding, right, with the Innovate UK and the grants you got, what do you think convinced them to invest in you or to give you that money? Like when you're just starting out, you hadn't really had anything yet. Why do they back you?
I think it's a really good question. I think a lot of it does come to team where even though we weren't climate specialists, we had lots of relevant things we could bring to the table. And for example, with me, because I spent I've had various EdTech experiences, most notably, for example, I joined at Series A an organization which is now known as Multiverse, which about, a few months ago became the UK's first ever EdTech unicorn. And my co-founder, Matt, he used to work in 10 Downing Street, and he was there for a couple of years when Theresa May was Prime Minister. And he's also done some very big public sector business development work. And so there are a lot of key skills which we had and which we had access to in terms of like network of advisors, which obviously is a huge kind of helping hand. And I think given the right team, given the right sort of clear market opportunity, and then I think probably then importantly, the final bit is that vision and the conviction in the vision. I think when you're at the early stages, that's the most you can have. But if you do have it, actually you do have quite a lot.
And then once you got that funding in these early days, what did you use it for? How did you use it effectively to make sure that, because people get that initial amount of funding, it's quite easy to, especially at early stages, to use it on the wrong thing. How did you know what to use that money on to help you achieve your mission?
So we won that grant theoretically in September, but then the money didn't actually hit our account until I think like November or something like that. So actually, even after we kind of in theory got it, there was still a period where we're like, okay, we actually don't have any money. Like, how do we do this? I think the best founders are people who are resourceful and resilient. And even for us, actually, with our pre-seed round, for example, you can sign the term sheet, but then when does the money hit your account? There's a whole legals process to go through and things like that. And so actually a constant theme for us has been, okay, there's some money theoretically, but there's something which is going to process to take it in. And we just need to keep executing. We just need to keep going, because this is such an urgent problem. This sort of fact that, like I said, by 2030, 30 to 60 million people will need green jobs. This is so urgent. You just cannot let up and wait for these things like this money to kind of come in. And so the way I kind of think about it is, if you really kind of want something, there's a willing it into being. And it's about, okay, well, what can we do without money? Such as, I can just pick up the phone and I can just talk to a kind of prospective customer. Or I can literally go on the street and kind of talk to college students. And that's a good discipline, I think, to get into actually as a founder. And even when you do have money, I think it's important not to lose that mindset, that scrappiness, because it's so easy, I think, sometimes, especially when we're talking about fundraising, it sort of seems really kind of glamorous. But actually, it's the discipline of building a business, which is kind of what obviously being a founder is about. And yes, you have money, and then the money does enable certain things, but the orienting mindset, I think, is the same regardless.
And you mentioned there about going out and just talking to people, right? And I feel like there's something that's so overlooked. People often think about social media, right? And they always ask questions on social media and you can reach a lot of people. But if you sit outside Liverpool Street Station, right, or outside London Bridge, where you'll have these people from startups trying to talk to people, and obviously I ignore them most of the time and walk past them, but there will be some people who stop. And we're going to do it with the Bay HQ, right? I'm going to start just randomly starting conversations with people on the train and be that weird guy. But it's just to get people's ideas, right? What do you think of what we're doing? Is there anything you think we should be doing better? Because sometimes you don't know that demand unless you're actually talking to people. And doing surveys and things like that gives you some regard of it. But from a conversation with somebody, you can really tell the tone. You can see how much of an urgent problem, how passionate they're about what you're saying. Because somebody might tick a box on an online survey, like, oh yeah, I'd be interested in this. But if you're talking to somebody like, yeah, I really believe in this, I really want you to do this, that's the fire that can help you keep going as well.
For sure. And it's about the fire, and it also makes it more real, because I think often when we start thinking about something, we start thinking about, say, perspective, like in my case, learners, or in general users, we might say, there's a sort of abstract idea you have in your head of, oh yeah, it'll be this kind of person. But then for me, the most powerful thing is when you talk to an actual person and the richness of their story comes to life, and you can really start to situate something within the nuances of everything which they're doing and they're going through. And it both gives you such a better understanding of the people you're trying to serve. But also, I find it really, actually, honestly, quite inspirational and motivating. The people who we've spoken to, some of the people who've got through these courses, they are people who I feel a tremendous debt to, honestly, a sense of like, I really, really want to build something which is great for them, because they are such hard workers, they're so conscientious, and they're so badly let down sometimes by existing pathways. And so when you have real people who are there, who can be your reference points, I think it's really powerful to guide your work and to kind of align your team and motivate everyone behind, at the end of the day, yes, okay, there's all this money, but really it's not really about the money. Really, it's about so-and-so who and people just like them who we're trying to serve.
I think it's something people forget, right? The funding isn't the end. The funding is the means to the end. And like, I know that you've recently closed your pre-seed, right? Are you allowed to say how much you raised?
Yes, so it's a 600k round.
Yeah, so that 600k, it looks great on paper, right? But then what you've got to think about is, how does that enable us to do what we want to do? And sometimes people, you see it all the time, right? People talk about their rounds. But okay, so what are you going to do with that money? And is it just going to burn away straight away? Or is it going to be, okay, with this 600k, we can make this impact? And obviously for you, what it's going to be is that 600k to make further progress towards your goals. You can get the more funding so you can really achieve that 10 million people impacted, or 10 million jobs, right? And as part of the impact as well, one of the things I know you're doing is you've also angel invested in the past. And we're talking about this before, about how it's all again to do the same thing. Like, how can you make an impact? And by helping people, I guess, who are like you, people who are really passionate about what they're doing. So can you talk about some of the angel investments you've made?
So I think angel investing is a brilliant thing to do. And it's exactly like you described. I think it's, for me, it's particularly when I see a founder who has a problem they really, really care about, and which ideally for me has potential to be really impactful as well. That's when I get personally really quite excited, because I believe that there's just this incredible, like, as someone, say, who, let's say I've got some money and I'm thinking about investing it, the best way I can think of getting a return on that money would be through the creation of a business which has done something really meaningful. And if I've supported that, and, I've got some return out of it, but actually it was return which was really meaningfully generated. I only got this return because something really impactful was built. I just think that's a brilliant kind of sort of orienting mindset. So I have been angel investing for about 2 to 3 years or so. I recently have joined Ada Ventures as an angel in their kind of second angel program. And so Ada Ventures is this UK fund which is really passionate about backing founders and early teams at pre-seed and seed who are taking on some of society's biggest problems. And so that really resonated with me and my approach to what I think startups can do for the world as well. So it's very exciting for me to be part of that. So as a result, what that means basically is, as opposed, it's sort of related to the previous angel investment, which I've done where, I'm investing my own sort of personal money typically there. As an Ada Ventures angel, essentially I've got a bit of money to invest on behalf of Ada Ventures. But it's something which I think people, when you say angel investing, people often think, oh, this must be someone who's like sitting on absolute like bags of money. And it's not the case at all. And for example, you can do pre-seed or angel investments for like £1,000, which, £1,000 isn't a trivial amount of money. But when people think of angel investment, they're probably thinking of a lot more than £1,000.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great thing for people to do, and to really also like just build up this sense of, like, you just learn a lot from founders. The founders who I've backed, some of them and the stuff they've gone on to do, I'm honestly really quite in awe of them. And that's one of the inspiring things, I think, for me, actually, as a founder, where before I was a founder, I had angel invested in some founders. And then I saw the amazing things they'd done, and it really humbles you. And so I think it's something which it seems really cryptic from the outside. But anyone who's really interested in ideas and people and things being better and things being created, I think should definitely consider angel investing.
Even for me, I think before I was into this world properly, I was always angel investors as, like you said, exited founders, people who are like multimillionaires, billionaires. But as you said, you were doing it when you just had a job, when you were just an employee. So anybody listening, if they've got some spare capital and they filled their ISA or whatever they want to do with it, then obviously examine the risks and things like that, but it is an option for you to look at. And if you study it, you work out more, we'll be putting some guides out and stuff like that to help people as well. But it's even one of the things I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at potentially starting to angel invest, and it's working out. I think it's always going to be scary to do your first deal, right? Because it's the first time we've done it. Am I going to get whatever? But we even know there's different government schemes to protect you in some ways, right, as well. So we can go into that in more detail, and I'll post like links to that kind of stuff. But we're going to have to move on to the quick fire questions now. But I'll definitely get you on again because I want to see how greenworkx is going. And now obviously you just got the funding in and see what you've done with that. So first question is, who are 3 British Asians that you'd love to shout out, you think people listening right now should be paying attention to or following?
So the first is Nikita Thakrar. She is co-founder and CEO of Included VC. Included VC, I think, is a brilliant organization, basically changing the face of venture capital, because venture capital is so often the same sort of profile. Included VC really works on increasing opportunity to people to learn about venture, no matter what background you're from. And I'm someone who, myself, for example, I went through Included VC. I was on the first cohort, and actually greenworkx would not have been possible without Included VC and the things I'd learned there. Although it's not designed to kind of for you to go off and be the founder, but it was, as it happens, really helpful for me. And so she definitely one of the 3. The second, Wing Chan, he is co-founder and CEO of Sourceful. So Sourceful is this sustainability startup, which has been another great source of inspiration to me. So they are building a sustainable way for businesses to kind of source all their kind of materials and packages sort of end to end in a sustainable way. And he's someone who, again, didn't have a climate background. He was just like, you know what, this is something which I think is important. And even though I don't have this climate background, I'm going to go and try and be a climate founder. And he's been sort of phenomenally successful. And, you know, the business like has raised from some brilliant investors at Series A. So he is another kind of person who I hold in kind of deep admiration. And then the third would be May Yip. May is one of the co-founders of Eric. Eric is a digital platform which kind of connects Gen Z to creative careers. May, as it happens, is one of the founders who I've angel invested in. And yeah, what really stood out to me when I spoke to her was that sort of like, yeah, clear mission drive. And it's when you have founders who, for me, you know, when they really, really care about the thing you're working on, you have a real sense of, you know what, this founder's just going to do absolutely whatever it takes to kind of build this thing. And I think she's doing really cool things.
Yeah, love to speak. Well, I know Nikita, obviously, but love to meet the other guys as well. It's like, sounds amazing. Then the next one is, what can people listening right now reach out to you for help about?
So if you are thinking about either the angel investing side, like I was talking about, I'm actually super passionate about it and increasing opportunities for people to do that. So if you're considering angel investing and you want to figure out like how do you get started, I'm super happy to chat about that. If you're also someone who's like thinking about being a founder or maybe are a founder, going through that process of maybe thinking about raising investment, as someone who's been on kind of both sides of that, I'm also really, really happy to chat about those things as well.
And then on the flip side, as you said, you've got a huge mission. Is there anything that people listening right now could help you with?
So it'd be brilliant if people could follow us and amplify our message. And if they can think of anyone who might be interested in these jobs, you know, there's really surprising backgrounds sometimes where we had people go through our course who, for example, they were a nurse for 30 years, but now they want to work in green jobs, or someone who actually was a UX researcher now wants a green job. And so it can really surprise you sometimes the people who are interested in these green jobs. So it'd be think about anyone who might be interested, send them our way, and also follow us and can share our things so it can reach as many people as possible.
And it's been amazing to chat to you today. Have you got any final words for the audience?
I would say climate is something which is really important. And even if you're someone who's not identified previously with the kind of climate theme, it affects all of us. And just in the UK, for example, in 2022, we had, all these kind of heat waves. There are heat waves in China. We have floods in Pakistan. It's such an important issue. And so I would ask people just to kind of be aware of it and kind of to have back in mind, like, what's their role they can play. And sometimes that's in one of these green jobs, which we're trying to help people into, but also it can be it can be working for a company, working for a startup.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount to us. And we don't think you realise how important you are. Because if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you leave us a 5-star review, it makes a world of difference. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here, to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians, if you do those things, you can help us achieve that mission, and you can help us make a bigger impact. And by doing that, it means we can get bigger guests, we can host more events, we can do more for the community. So you can play a huge part. So thank you so much for supporting us.